We have a number of interesting questions to deal with today. One of them is very difficult to discuss in the sense that it's not the most beautiful part of life, it's more the ugly part of life. But nevertheless, the halach has to address every issue. And this question came up in Brooklyn, New York, and it was addressed by the Piskei Chamudos, and he wrote back and forth to his Rebbe, Rabbi Reisman, about this shaila. And from the Piskei Chamudos, we get a little bit of the issue and some of the questions that come up. Once again, by way of introduction, I'm more fascinated here by psak halacha, in other words, the methodology of deciding halacha, which comes to the fore in a very profound way in this particular shaila. In the case of olos, which means that a kohen is not allowed to be in the same oil as a dead body, as a corpse. And here's a case of a man whose wife, unfortunately, tragically, was carrying in her body a dead baby, what we would call a stillborn. Now, the truth is that in the later stages, and we've had cases of a woman even going the full term of 9 months and giving birth to a deceased baby, which is called a nefel. But in that case, you need a hospital. That's critical. This case is a case in which the nefel was in an earlier stage. And because there was no danger to her life, and because of Corona, the hospitals refused to admit her, which means that she would have to get this stillborn out of her body on her own, at home. And everyone's in quarantine at this point. No one's going in and out of the house. The case takes place a few days before Pesach. Pesach, on that particular year, which is a year ago, was on Thursday, Friday, and Shabbos. And her husband is a Kohen. So these are the facts on the ground that we have to know. They're in quarantine. What could be done here to avoid the violation of the Iser, which is a doraisa, on a Kohen being together in the same ohel as a dead corpse? She would have to give birth to this baby on her own. Now, in this tshuva that's written by the Piskei Chamudos, Rav Daniel Kleinman, he offers quite a number of reasons and halachic logical arguments to be makil, to find a leniency here, allowing the husband to remain in the house despite the fact that his wife is going to give birth to this stillborn. Now, at the beginning of the tshuva, he raises the possibility that maybe a nefel, which is not a living being, is not mitami betumas ohel. The Rambam, however, in Hilchas Tumas Mes, paskins explicitly that a nefel is mitami tumas ohel, no less than a viable being. But at this point in the tshuva, Rav Daniel mentions a different Rambam elsewhere, in which the baby is only considered a nefel if it reaches a state of development which is called kidei rikma, where there's already the fetus has already developed certain features. And it's not clear because, as I said at the outset, we are not in the 9th month over here. We're in an earlier month, and it's not clear whether or not this fetus has reached the state of Kedei Rikma. The poskim say that anu, in our time, ein anu b'kiyum b'rikma. We don't know, we don't have the expert knowledge to understand whether or not, looking at this fetus, it has reached that stage, which it is a nefel and it's metame b'tumas oel. And therefore, the poskim write that we always assume lechumra with regard to an isa doraisa that the fetus has already developed that stage of Kedei Rikma. However, there's another issue here that could be raised, and that is that sometimes, and I apologize about my phone, I just have to keep it on because David was very kind and he sent me this tshuva in my phone. I was not able to print it out. I printed it out, but it's not legible. So I'm going to have to read parts of the tshuva from my phone, and therefore my phone is on. So I apologize about that. I don't usually leave my phone on for the shir. The second issue here, in terms of Tumas Oel, Tumas Mes, is an issue about the features of the fetus. Occasionally, the fetus is not really a fetus at all. It's not really a human being. It's again, we don't know all the details here, but the Gemara says that it has a tzura of a chaya or an oaf. It doesn't even look vaguely like a human being, and it's not mitami ba'oel. The poskim write that the possibility that that might occur is very slim. Ruba de ruba, in most cases, we don't have such a possibility. We don't consider it as a viable option. However, Rav Kleinman adds another element into the equation. Since she is going to have to, quote unquote, give birth to this fetus, to this stillborn, she's going to likely do so in the bathroom. And the door of the bathroom is closed. Ultimately, they're going to take the stillborn out of the bathroom. And if the husband is somewhere in the house, that's called, in the language of Shas, sof tuma lotzes. That even if right now we haven't taken the body out, but if we can anticipate that the body will be taken out, then anyone in that area of the house where the body will be removed is makabel tuma. That's called sof tuma lotzes. For example, the Gemara addresses a case in Masechta Eruvin, and it's also in the Mishnayos and Olos, where the corpse is here in one room, and there's a door that leads to the next room. And we can assume that the corpse, when it's taken out for burial, will be taken out through that door. Sof tuma lotzes means that anyone in the next room beyond that door is considered to be in one oel with the mess. And so Rav Kleinman asks the following question: if she'll give birth in the bathroom and the husband is in the next room, then the stillborn will be taken out eventually into that room so that we can exit from the house and bury the stillborn. That's called sof tuma lotzes. And here, the Bigdei Chamudos quotes a shach. The shach is of the opinion that sof tuma lotzes is only d'Rabbanan. On a doraisa level, we don't recognize sof tuma lotzes. And this opinion of the shach became the, what shall I call it, the victim of so many onslaughts and attacks. I mean, the poskim, starting from the Magen Avos and all the way down, they tried to prove over and over again from different Rishonim, including Rashi, that sof tuma lotzes is the oraisa. But now we can add up 3 different factors, and I'll be with you, Joe, in just a minute. Factor number 1, is it possible that the nefel is not mitami b'oel? Possibility number two, and we consider the possibility that maybe this fetus has not reached the stage of Kedei Rikma. And even though the poskim say that in our time we can't determine whether it's Kedei Rikma or not, and therefore we always assume that it reached that stage, nevertheless, can we consider this as one argument, which is called in the poskim a sniff? Sniff means a branch. This is one branch that will kick in when we have an overall picture. We don't know if a nafel is metame. We don't know if this nafel reached Kedei Rikma. And the third element in the equation is now the possibility that maybe this fetus is not a real fetus at all. It's not a human entity. And it has a tzura of a chaya or an oath, and it's not metame at all. Add to that the possibility that since she's going to give birth to this nafel in the bathroom with a locked door, the husband, who's a Kohen, is in the next room. He's not in the same oil. And if you'll argue sof tumalatzes, we will invoke the shita of the shach, who holds that sof tumalatzes is only d'Rabbanan. And therefore, we have a sfek sfeka on a d'Rabbanan. Number one, did it reach the state of Kedei Rikma? Number two, is it a fetus at all? And we're dealing with an Issa d'Rabbanan of sof tumalatzes. And therefore, we can apply the principle perhaps of sfek sfeka l'kula in an Issa d'Rabbanan. At the end of the tshuva, and Joe, you're on right next, he offers another possibility, that a woman in childbirth is always considered a chola sheyesh ba sakana. And within the context of a chola sheyesh ba sakana, we have a principle called yisuvei daite. For example, in contemporary time, a husband is allowed to go with his wife on Shabbos in the ambulance or in the taxi or to drive the car to the hospital to be with his wife when she gives birth. Because she needs it for her mental state. She is calmed down by the fact that her husband is with her. And in this particular case, we cannot call her a chola sheyesh bo sakana, because otherwise, I'm in the middle of a shir now. Otherwise, if she were a chola sheyesh bo sakana, then even during the Corona period, they would have allowed her entry into the hospital. But a chola she'ein bo sakana still has what we call yisuvei daite. The husband being in the house is going to help her get through this difficult period. And even if her life is not endangered, but nevertheless, we have poskim that will allow yisuvei daite and recognize that factor, even in a case of a chola she'ein bo sakana. And Rav Kleiman, therefore, at the end of this tshuva says that if you, I call it a chulent tshuva. What do I mean by chulent? Meaning if you add A plus B plus C and you turn it all up, there's enough reason and enough logic here that if it's not this reason, maybe it's this reason. If it's not that reason, and maybe it's this reason. And therefore we can be makil. And he paskins that if she locks herself in the bathroom, her husband is allowed to remain in the house, even though he's a Kohen. Joe.
So first of all, I just wanted to point out, the Rav told the person on the phone he's giving a shir. I think the person obviously knows the Rav's always giving a shir. So I don't know how that helped. Okay, that's besides the point.
I'm going to send your question to my wife, and let's see how she can defend herself.
And then I wanted to, two things I wanted to ask with regards to being the sof tumalatzus. Is there not an issue, isn't there something that if we define the door that the mace is going through, that's going to be the other one? If another door is closed in another area, what's beyond that door is considered not part of it? Do we not have that? Is that not a part of
Well, again, I don't know all the details of Sof Tumalates. What happens if you have a suffix and you're not sure which of the doors it's going to go through? That's a sugya.
Right, exactly.
And
So,
it
but
could be
here,
that Sof Tumalates requires a doraisa. But in any event, the situation that we're describing is one of Sof Tumalates, meaning the husband who's a Kohen is definitely going to be in the area of the tumah when they take the tumah out. Right now, they're not taking the tumah out. Now, Rav Kleiman writes this tshuva to his Rebbe, Rabbi Tzvi Reisman. I don't know if you're familiar, but in Brooklyn, Rav Tzvi Reisman is considered a high authority. I have a first cousin in Brooklyn who attends his Motzei Shabbos Tanach Shir. Over 1,000 people attend every Motzei Shabbos. I mean, you're talking about, a very, very prominent and respectable. And in this case, we know because in the past we've studied the Big Day Chamudos, thanks to our friend David, and we know how great he is. And if he defers to Rav Reisman, you could begin to appreciate who Rav Reisman is. Now, if we go back one generation, Rav Reisman is a Talmud of Rav Pam, Rosh Hashiva Torvadas. So we're really going through a whole lineage here. Now, again, because I have to use my phone to read this tshuva to you, I find here something very, very fascinating in Rav Reisman's response. And that's why I say, some people are telling me here in Israel, drop it on Corona because we're doing much better here, Baruch Hashem. Bli Ayin Hara. What'll be tomorrow, I don't know. In my shul, I think I mentioned to you, no one's wearing masks anymore. And there's Kemat no social distancing. But still, nevertheless, I am fascinated by the halachic principle here that comes out of the response of Rabbi Yisrael Reisman. And he writes like this. Again, I'm reading it from my phone. Benidon isha muberes shemes ha'ubar v'adayin b'meyeha v'giach chag shel Pesach yimei chamishi v'shishi v'achak Shabbos u'mefachadim sha'ubar yetze b'chag. We don't exactly know when she's going to give birth to this fetus, this dead stillborn. V'az havi nefel hamitami v'oel. HaNefel gam ken yeh b'muktzah. Now he goes into a side point, which is not for us now, but there's something called kikar otinot, which means that with regard to a corpse, you can move a corpse on Shabbos by placing either a baby on top of the corpse or a loaf of bread. But he says that has to do with covered mess, and that heter to move muktzah doesn't even apply in the case of a nefel. Habal Kohen, her husband is a Kohen. The ein lo makom lotzeis liol acher mikam hamachala noga'a parut chaim. He says because of the strict rules, this is when Corona hit the most intense level. He cannot go out of the house. The efshal levakish me'akum, you can't even ask a guy to take the nefel out through a window because no one's willing to go into the house. And now he writes a compliment to Rav Daniel Kleinman, who sent him the tshuva with all his analytical points, and he writes, Kvodo herich be'inyanu kemachalo iniach prat choser. It's almost as if he didn't leave one detail that wasn't unearthed over here, because he covers all. Again, I gave you just the tip of the iceberg, but it's a 5-page tshuva here in which he goes through all of Tumas Oel. But he says, Afal Pichen, even though I want to be Mitzayin here, a Ha'ora Klos, I want to give you as a Talmud of mine, since you asked, a comment that you should apply in all your methodology as you go through your life as a posek. And he goes on to tell a story in the year Tafshin Mem Aleph. he was zoche, he says, to sit in the sukkah for 2 hours together with the Minchas Yitzchak. The Minchas Yitzchak, was the chief posek in England and then in Yerushalayim in the Badatz, Rav Yitzchak Weiss. And he said that during the 2 hours that he was in the sukkah, the Minchas Yitzchak encouraged him to listen to all the questions that were coming. They were flowing in one after the other. And that would be his shimush, that Rav Reisman could learn how to paskin. And Rav Reisman writes here that he was very disappointed in the shilas. He said there were no chidushim, there were no insights. He says, I could have answered all the shilas myself. They were simple questions about sukkah and schach. And he says, why did they bother the Minchas Yitzchak, one of the great Gaonim, with these kinds of questions? However, he writes that during a certain break in that 2-hour period, there was an interruption with free time. I started, says Rav Reisman, asking the Minchas Yitzchak my own questions that came up in my role as a posek. And he stops me. The Minchas Yitzchak stops me. And he says, And now Rav Weisen says what he said now is going to be a Yesod Gadol. He says very fundamental in Psak Halacha. Shelasos. Oh, now if anybody wants to follow this, what page is it? Whatever, you'll see it. I just can't get out of this. And okay, he says Lasso Snifim. Vitzirufim. What page number?
Reish Nun Vav.
Reish Nun Vav. 256. 256. Okay, bottom right. This should be underlined. He says, Lasso Snifim, Vitzirufim, Vipsak Halacha, Eino Maskeh. You have one logical reason here, one reason here, one posek here, and you make, as I called it, a cholent. He doesn't use that word, tzirufim. That's not enough. L'kabeit shitot v'lisnos tzirufim. You want to be matir and isa doraisa by adding x plus y plus z. He says, Ella, why did the poskim have snifim, have these branches? You need one logical reason compelling to be makil. But we accepted upon ourselves, despite that heter, to be machdir. Now that Meikar Adin, according to strict primary law, it should be mutter. Now, if people want to be machmir, you could be makil based on sirufim, almost as if to convince people that there's room to be makil. And he was talking about using a milchika pot, and on top of the pot, he puts hot meat. And Meikar Adin, it's permissible, but we are machmir when you put hot meat on a kli cheres, because Edo Yotz Midei Dofyo, you can't kasher a pot. But he writes that there's a sheet of the Bala Itur that if you do 3 hagolas over and over again on a china pot, then it is effective and you can get out the belief. So since Meikar Adin, right, this has to do with the principle called Ein Blia Yotzeis Cham Lacham Below Rota, but we're not going to get into that. Meikar Adin, he says we should be making, but we took it upon ourselves to be machmir. Now you could quote the Bala Itur and do 3 agolas on a piece of pottery. And therefore, says Rav Reisman to his Talmud, the Big Day Chamudos, Benida Didan Nami, Ein Mokom Lahakil Mitzad Asfekos. Not one of your arguments is convincing. To say that, well, maybe the baby's not merukam, there's no rikima, ain't on a bekim berukam. And we have a halacha psuka that we're always machmir as long as the nefel was 40 days after the conception, then it's metamet. Then one of the things that Rav Reisman made a big deal about is that maybe it's not sof tumulotzeis because we don't have to bury the nefel, so we don't have to take it out of the bathroom. He says that's not so. Halacha psuket leinu. We paskin clearly, without any doubt, that a nefel has to be born. It's not a pleasant. Has to be buried. I'm sorry. It's not a pleasant experience. I didn't have it, but my closest friend had it. It's poshut horrible. Take out a nefel and bury it, and not. I don't even want to say the words, but if it's a male baby, you do a mila on it, a stillborn. It's not something that you forget and wake up the next morning and Then he says, "Be'inyan shitas hashach," that from one room to another room, which is sof tuma lotzes, is only d'Rabbanan. He says all the poskim are opposed to the shach. The Ayin Mishnah Berurah, Siman Kuf Chav Vav, and not only that, he says that some of the poskim try to reinterpret the shach that he never meant to say it, because sof tuma lotzes is clearly dorais. So as I said to you over and over again, Corona shilas are fascinating sometimes because of the methodology. You see that because of Corona, we're in such a pressure that we push the envelope and we try to come up with kulas because of the terrible situation we're in, but we shouldn't lose sight of the methodology of Psach. Now, Rav Reisman himself, in this particular case, offered another solution. And he said the following: Amarti la'ish, I told the woman, Shemiyad kishayetze ha'ubar v'hi bevadei b'beis hakisei. So she's locked up in the bathroom, and she gives birth to the ubar. Tikba, she should make a decision in her mind, sheyotziu ha'ubar derech hachalon, that they will not take the ubar through the door, but rather through the window. Al yedei zeh, kishetetze mi beis hakisei tiskar adeles, v'nimtza adeles sosem hatuma vadlosos. So that if the sof tuma lotzes is not through the door, then the door could be a chatzitza as she leaves the room. However, when she leaves the room, titzak lebailo, she should yell out to her husband HaKohen, shelo yeh ba'oso hacheder, he should not be in that room because she hasn't yet locked the door. Now we go on to page 257. Whoops. But he says, very interesting, on the next page, that the gag, the roof of this house, like all the homes in Brooklyn, New York, and probably in Toronto as well, the roof protrudes beyond the walls, which means that if the Kohen will leave the house, since it's sof tuma lotzes through the window, therefore tachas hagag habolet, the tuma is what we call tuma ritzutza. It's ola ad l'rakia because it's underneath the gag. And he says that if anyone wants to open the deles hachutza, hakohen yisager atzmo b'chedro, he's going to have to lock himself up in the room. He says, "V'keno reisi, v'hu atzah al mishnah ba'olos chashav lahotzi b'yechadem matzeles." That if you decide that you're going to take the tumah through one of the doors, then another door, if it's locked, is a chatzitza and will spare his tumah. So the Kohen is in the following situation: he's not to be in the next room over when they open the door, because then the avir is mitzaref. If he's not there, she will lock the door behind her as soon as she leaves the washroom. He can now be in any room in the house. He just can't leave the house because of Corona. No, I'm just kidding. He can't leave the house because of the gag, which is now going to bring down the tumah if he leaves the house. Now, let's see for a moment if we can rewind to page 255, Reish Nun Hey. Rav Kleinman, since he's writing the tshuva to his Rebbe Rav Reisman regarding Tumah, in the case of the Nefel, he says, I would like to add another question that came up just yesterday. Now, by the time this tshuva is getting out to Rav Reisman, it's already Chol Hamoed Pesach. Are we allowed to give the children, and the word children here, he points out, he says it explicitly, is children either below or above the age of bar mitzvah. We're locked up in quarantine. We got to keep the children busy. It's Chol Hamoed. One of my members of the shul here has 8 children, Kanai Nahara. They're locked up for who knows how long with quarantine. I mean, Kendach Meshugavar. You could go absolutely crazy. So it's Chol Hamoed. Can we give them a toy, litzvoa, litzayer, hidei lisaneg bechol hamoed? V'chein, has another toy, lahadbik niyoros biofen kavua shaomed l'kiyu. We give them madbekot, things that you attach, and that's called hadbakat niyarot. They put together, maybe they make shapes out of it. And he says, through hechrech, what's forcing me to try to come up with a kula? Limto ofen lahasik es hayeladim kevan sha'asur lotzeis litiul, and we need to occupy the children. And then he writes, Lo yadati lahatir b'zeh. I don't know how to be matir because tzovea is a malacha, hadbaka is a tolda of tofer, which is a malacha, and he's doing it with what's called a maisa hejot. You don't need a professional, but nevertheless, he's doing it likiyum. Once he attaches it with paste or whatever it is, he can't take it apart. And the Shulchan Aruch paskins that this is asur on Chol Hamoed. He says the only heter that perhaps we could find is that it's considered tzarchei hamoed. Why is it tzarchei hamoed? The tanug, the oneg that he has here, is not your classic oneg of tzarchei hamoed, because he has no oneg from the malacha per se. The oneg is only coincidental to the malacha. Sometimes the malacha itself inherently is oneg, and that's mutter on Chol Hamoed mishum tzarchei hamoed. But this is not tzarchei hamoed. There's no oneg inherent in the malacha. Just that he gets pleasure from the final product. He makes a shape, he paints something. He says that maybe we could compare it to a tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein. Rav Moshe Feinstein, again, I'm sorry, this is hard for me to read here. I don't know if the word is liklot or liklos. I don't know if that's a samach or a tes. I think it's with a samach. I don't know. Maybe it came clear in your tapuchim bechol hamoed. So
Likut.
Oh, with a tes at the end?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure then exactly what he means.
Likut tapuchim, picking apples.
Picking them off a tree, he means?
I don't know. I guess.
I mean, that's not me, Lisha Vielich. Okay, I don't know. Since it's Chol Moed, I thought he was peeling the apples. Okay, anyway, so he doesn't even tell you where it is. It's only Mipi Hashmua that Rav Moshe was matir it. And why? Because he gets some pleasure from taking the apples. He says, however, my impression is that Rav Moshe was only matir kishem bo kol panim acharkach lasos mimenu tavshil l'sudas yontif. So whatever he does to these apples, I guess he's enjoying.
You go apple picking and then you use the apples to make something, no?
Yeah, so
you can only
I
use
guess
the
he
ones
doesn't
that
really
you
need
can
the
pick
apples, but he's going to use the app. I don't know. It's not clear to me. He said,
But you
"Mitzad
can-
etzem tainug ha'pu'ula lo mutzasi sheheba ze geder litzorech hamoed."
But you wouldn't be able to pick extra. You can only pick the ones that you need. If you're
But
actually
again,
picking
keep in
apples,
mind, he's not picking the apples because he needs the apples. But at the end, once he picks them and he enjoys whatever he's enjoying, he's going to throw the apples into a pot. So in
I
other
know
words,
that your
Rav
silver
Kleiman
costs
wants to
$2.
suggest that maybe this could be a kind of indirect tainug. You know, he's not enjoying the malacha per se, but at the end of the day, after the malacha is done, he can use it litzarech hamoed. But what I wanted to point out to you is Rav Reisman's response to this shaila, and that's again back on page 257. That's how it appears here in mine. He says, "Benidon milacha b'chol hamoed, the ofen schok. Am I allowed to engage in malacha on chol hamoed because I'm having a good time? She'ein bo toeles." He says there's no purpose here with Tzorech hamoed. He's not getting dressed or feeding himself. He's just enjoying a mischat. So the hanoah here is only the schok. Yafe kasavta. Shedome, oh, here it's clear. Liliku tapuchim, shenases keheter. Now, if I understand, again, you'll argue with me, but I think the words nases keheter mean the following. I'm going to read into this. That this tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein about going apple picking on Chol Hamoed, or I guess maybe, if I remember from my days in Toronto, we used to go berry picking, I think it was. Anyway, so this tshuva, he says, became what he calls nases keheter. Everybody goes picking on Chol Hamoed. Why? Because Rav Moshe allowed it. And, you know, you're getting tainug from picking. Again, keep in mind, Rav Moshe assumes that what you pick, you will eventually cook in a pot. So maybe that's a little bit different. But he says that my Rebbe Rav Pam, lacham keneged zeh. He saw it as a, this was a fight that he wanted to battle. That people thought, oh, we can do anything on Chol Hamoed because we enjoy it. We get hana from it. Imagine I'm going to go to work on Chol Hamoed, and I'm going to say, well, I enjoy the work, because I'm getting a salary, of course. Of course you enjoy the work. It's nasis keheta. You might as well pack out of Chol Hamoed and call it a vacha dekadeh. Pam bikesh miminale beis hayakov lahafsik hatalmidim mizeh shekavu laleches yachad b'chol hamoed. The Beis Yaakov Meidluch decided that on Chol Hamoed they're going out on a trip. They're going to violate who knows how many malachas on Chol Hamoed, but they're doing it for the tzchok because that's how they get pleasure from it. And Rav Pam said, please talk to the Menalim in Beis Yaakov to stop this. It's nases keheta. It's getting out of hand. He quotes a sefer, which I have here somewhere. I have to find it. But anyway, It's called Chol HaMoed. I think it was published by Lakewood Yeshiva. And they quote a tshuva from Rav Stern, the Debetziner, in which he allows taking driver's lessons on Chol HaMoed. Why? Because the young people get a tainug. They enjoy going out on a lesson to learn how to drive. I have to tell you the honest truth. When I took driving lessons, I hated it. I was sick for a week before every lesson. I hated it. But apparently the young people enjoy driving lessons. So he wanted to allow it on Chol HaMoed because it's Tzarchei HaMoed, because you get a tainug from it. But he says, Sefer Gufa, when the Debetziner published his Tshuva Sefer, Pasak Lahachmir, in his book called Moedei Hashem, he paskins that you're not allowed to take driver's lessons on Chol HaMoed. So with all due respect to, apparently at some point, the Debetziner must have said to someone that if you enjoy driving lessons, you're allowed to go out for a drive and drive your car, for the pleasure of it. He says, Ulai, perhaps, in these two cases of apple picking and learning how to drive, he says, really, what's your purpose if not for after Chol HaMoed? I'm not exactly sure what he means by that in the case of apple picking, but I guess he means he's not going to eat the apples on Chol HaMoed. But in the case of driving lessons, he wants to pass his driver's test. So that's hachana li'achar Chol HaMoed. Rak sheyesh litzaded, maybe you want to come up with a heter, mitzad haschok, because he enjoys it, he gets benefit from it. However, perhaps we could be mekil in the case of mischakei yeladim, shem ach v'rak l'shah. They're not preparing for something down the line. They're not going to go to some sort of a public auction and sell the artwork that they're creating. It's just for the pleasure of it. That's what the children enjoy doing. V'hanosam hi b'derech dimyon. There's nothing in the malacha that is a preparation for the future. I mean, everything is imagination. They imagine what this looks like and so forth and so on. Shari, perhaps we could be making the most chok kadur biyontiv bitosis beitza. Now, this is interesting. Are you allowed to play ball on Yontiv? Tosin Beitza says you're allowed to. And the Marshal doesn't understand this tosfos. There's malach of hotzah over here. There's no eruv, and they're playing ball. And how can we allow this on Yontiv? He says, Eich natir hotzah lischok hayeladim. But then he says, V'anochon, if you want to ask about playing ball on Yontif without an eruv, if he behaves like a child, okay, it's not. There are adults who also like to throw around the ball. It's not terrible. It's sharilo. For him, it's mutter. So we see that the pleasure that you get out of schok is also considered a hana if it's the last stop on your way. You're not preparing for after Yontif, or in this case, for after Chol HaMoed. Now, the next part of the tshuva is also very gory, very difficult. There's a backlog of corpses that haven't been buried, and the question is whether you can bury them on Yontif Sheni. And Rav Moshe paskins that we don't bury on Yontif Sheni, but he wants to say that maybe in this case we could bury on Yontif Sheni, but he gets into a whole issue about a non-religious Jew who has the status of a mumar. Can we bury is there a din of kavod hames for which we want to be mekil on Yontif Sheni? And he's not sure. He thinks that maybe in the case of a mumar, we don't have kavod hames and we're not going to be mekil about burying on Yom Tov Sheni. That's a whole nother truth. Okay, so that's what I want to discuss from those pages. And again, as I said, this is very exciting to me because it gives you a clear methodology in Psak that we don't look for a sniff here and a sniff here and add it all together. If I were to reformulate what Rav Reisman says in the name of the Minchas Yitzchak, I would call it the following: 0 plus 0 equals 0. It's not a half plus a half equals a whole. If the half is a 0, then you could add as many zeros as you like. You still end up with 0. So you can't just put Snifim together. But we'll quote Snifim and advocate in favor of Snifim in a case where we have a heter to rely upon. All right. Now, if we're talking about Moed, let's say a few words about Sfiras HaOmer. And here in the Minchas Yitzchak, Minchas Asher, Rav Asher Weiss, which I just received about a week and a half ago, he wants to know about music during Sfira. And he has apparently a Talmud by the name of Rav Avram Katz. By the way, you notice, again, here it's Reish Pei Zayin, so I'm not sure exactly what number you're dealing with, but notice how he spells the name Katz. Katz is Chaf Tzadi. He spells it Kuf Aleph Tzadi, Kuf Aleph Tet Tzadi. Do you know what that means? Anybody? Means he's not a Kohen. But you call a falsha Katz. And the Minig Yisrael is that if you're not really a Kohen, don't spell it Chaf Tzadi, which is Kohen Tzedek, spell it with a Kuf. All right, anyway. So this Avrech wants to know about the possibility of allowing music during Sfira, during this period of time, because people are a little bit down, they're lonely, etc., during Corona. And can we be makil with music during Sfira? And although the shaila itself is not published here, unfortunately, I suspect, again, it's just Libi Omerli, that this Rav Avram Katz was probably asking about recorded music, not live music. And number two, he was probably asking about what we call Shirei Kodesh. And the precedent in halacha to be more makel with Shirei Kodesh, not in Sfira, is the Sridei Eish. You may know that Rav Weinberg, Zichron Levracha, the Sridei Eish, who survived the most terrible experiences during the Holocaust, he paskined for what was like Bnei Akiva in that time, which was called Yeshurun in France, that he would allow boys and girls to sing together Shirei Kodesh. Again, he had many, many different snifim, as we'd call it. It was Trei Koli Lo Mishtamoy, and he was worried about intermarriage in France. And he said that he got a lot of flack, as you could imagine, for being makil about that. For some reason, and I think I know why, Rav Asher Weiss, Shlita, uses this question as a springboard. And he opens the tshuva by saying, Asiach lecha et tzari. I want to share with you what I'm so upset about. B'ma shenir'eh li k'magama b'kerev tzibur nirchav. He thinks that there's a phenomenon in Psak Halacha that's widespread amongst the community. Sharabanim, Rabim, Mekilim, they come up with kulas. Bechol Tchum, in every different area, Ekev Machlas HaKorona. And he goes through a number of examples. Elu, Potru es Hanoshim milenakos lepesach. I saw one tshuva where he says that you don't have to cover your shayes twice. A lot of women will insist on covering their shayes, and on top of that, they'll put another covering, or they'll kasha the shayis, and then on top of that, they'll put a covering. All right, anyway. Elu hitiru achilas kidnios. Okay, I don't want to share with you my feeling about that. I mean, the one time of the year for 1 week out of the year that I'm jealous that I'm not a Sfaradi is because I love hummus. But he says that they would make il, ba'ofen goreif, that you're allowed to eat kidneys. I don't know of any posek who said that straight across the board you're allowed to eat kidneys during Corona. I will tell you that when my wife and I had Corona, not this Pesach, but the previous Pesach, they brought us, the Chayalim brought us with all their suits and everything, they brought us 2 gigantic boxes that were sent to us gratis by the government. And 90% of what was in those boxes was kidneys. But thank God we have a number of Sephardic neighbors here, so we were able to ship out. Even the sardines were kidneys, because they used oils that were kidneys. The elu hitiras adibur biyontiv derech machshev likroveim b'merchakim hanemtzeim b'bidud. Look, my friends, if there's someone who's really ill and depressed, and he's an older person, maybe there is room to be makil, allowing a person to speak into some sort of a technological, some sort of a technological creation. Elu hitiru lishtol prochim b'kol hamoed. I don't know. I never heard of this, but start planting flowers on Chol. I don't know, basically. And he says that we got to the situation called Mekil Mechavero Harezem Meshuvah. Yeah, Harezem Meshuvah. The Gemara says so. Koch de Teira Adif. He says, I'm going to fight a battle here. Magamazu ein lo kol makom v'kol hatzdaka. Alo b'shas tzora nachnu. U'b'shas tzora muto al kol echad v'echad l'schazek v'linog b'chumras hadin l'kadish atzmo b'mutalo. Is that really so? But both say, I'm from a different planet. I have to tell you. In my mind, if it's a shas hatzora, then you try to find every kula that you can. It doesn't mean that everything's mutter. Anyway, he says it's simple to him that you can't come up with a general heter to listen to music during Sfira. However, he says that if you find a person, a man or a woman, that are in a state of depression, and music could take them out of a state of depression, the yimta margua lenafsho hasoara, he's got koshi nafshi kain dikaon, Rachmana litzlan, yesh lo hakil, and he goes on to speak about horim lemishpachot gedolot, and as we said before, they have many children, they have large families, and it's very difficult for them to keep the children preoccupied. And we're talking about recorded music, yesh lahakel, but only with regard to what he calls shirei neshama. We used to call it dvekus. Do you remember that? So those kinds of songs he's going to allow for the benefit of the children, but not shirei simcha. He's not going to allow the children to jump around and dance during Sfira. Terrible Isa. Because 24,000 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva died during this period. How can you allow singing and Shirei Simcha? And then in the last line, he asks HaKadosh Baruch Hu to bring an end to this terrible situation. Okay, that's the Minchas Osher. Now, we're going to fast forward to page Tov Chaf Gimel. This is the issue of Tefillah B'Yom. And he writes a tshuva to a Rofe Mumche, who's the Yerushalayim, a friend of his, he says, by the name of Rabbi Elisha Khan. Again, he's probably not a Kohen because he spells with a Kuf, I don't know. And he's a physician in England. I don't have to tell you, England got it pretty bad. That's an understatement. And he says that although the mikvos are under very tight supervision and surveillance, and they try that any woman who has to go to mikvah, they're marchik one from the other. In other words, you get an appointment, and the next appointment is an hour later, whatever it might be. And this Dr. Khan is asking, in yesh makom lahakel, shanoshim titbolna biyom shmini. Can they go into mikveh during the day? And the Minchas Chinuch writes Minchas Osher, writes a very short tshuva. He quotes the Shulchan Aruch, also litbol biyom, v'af biyom hashmini mishum srach bita. So those who were with me last week, you'll remember this whole discussion that we had. But he says that if you look in Yoredeya, Simon Kuf Tzadi Zayin, Sif Dalid, Hechadika Ones, Kigon Shireil Litbol Balayla Machmas Tzina, O Pachad Ganovim, O Shesogrim Shari Ha'ir, Yechola Litbol B'Shmini B'Bo Jom. She's allowed to go to the mikveh during the day, on the 8th day. Harelecha, Hechadika Ones, this is our advice, Lo Gazru Mutala Litbol B'Yom Hashmini. Wait a second. Hold everything. Look at the cases that are mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. It's freezing cold. There are ganovim all over the place, lurking in the shadows. They lock up the doors of the city at night. She may get stuck on the outside of the city. Rabosai, what's common to all these three cases in the Shulchan Aruch? It's ones hashaval hakol. All the women in town are suffering from the same onus. But the shaila that Dr. Khan addressed here was about a mikveh that's under very strict surveillance and supervision for hygienic purposes. Rav Weiss admits that in the Piskei Tshuva, there's a chamudei Daniel that ain't mekilin el ba'onis derabim shel kol b'nei ha'ir, aval ba'onis de'yachid lahakil. Ach, belechem v'salma, docha dvora. V'ochiach miloshen Rambam, degam chole, after avi onis de'yachid mekilim. The Rambam mentions chole, which is onis de'yachid, your individual mitigating circumstance, but the Shulchan Aruch omits that part of the Rambam. Very strange. Then he refers you to the Divrei Malkiel. But if you remember, the Divrei Malkiel made a big deal to try to understand the logic of the Chamudei Daniel that jumps right out of the pages, the folios of the Talmud Bavli, because in every case it was a takana in that city because of the peculiar situation and circumstances of that city. Nothing in the Gemara seems to indicate that there's an ones diyachid. And the Piskei Tshuva quotes the Chamudei Daniel as if that's final halacha. Even the Divrei Malkiel works so hard to try to fared for the Rambam, and how is the Rambam going to square with the Gemara? And he comes up with a fantastical chiddush, if you recall from last week, that maybe according to the Rambam, it's a big chiddush that we can make a takana that's okay, the original takana. Ayin ksuba stav gimel. And he goes on to say that therefore Lamaisa, it's mutter, she can go to mikvah by day, and he says it without taking a blink. If you remember, the Big Day Chamudos of Rav Daniel Kleinman, he couldn't be matir here, and he speaks about the husband calming down his wife about the cleanliness and the standards and demands of hygiene in that mikvah, and not one woman got sick from going to the mikvah during Corona, and speak to her softly and try to convince her that she should go to the mikvah. At the end of the tshuva, you remember, he quotes his Rebbe, Reb Shmuel Kamenetsky, from Philly, that Reb Shmuel says that if you can't convince her in Shas HaGadol for the sake of the mitzvah period of Rivya, we'll let her go during the day. But that's only a Shas HaGadol. But what bothers me is that, it's such a deep sugya with, and I don't know, what can I tell you? Fast forward to Tuf Chaf Zayin, and we're going to just keep it going for 5 more minutes. We're not going to get to the tshuva about whether Chas and Kala have to take off their masks under the chuppah. Maybe we'll do that next week. He wants to know, can a woman go into the ocean as tefillah? And he says, Sheshal, that what you asked, again, he doesn't write the Shela here, that Noshim B'kilaschem, Shechosheshos Litbol B'mikvah, Pen Tidbekena V'virus HaKorona, V'echad Mechashuvei HaRabbonim, Posak Shetelechna Litbol B'yah, Ubaylo Yamid Oleha B'shas Tefillah, to make sure that she goes down, her hair is down, there's no chatzitza, and so forth and so on. Daha kol hayamim ksheru l'tvila. That's the halach. But he says, the minchas osher masher posek harav shetitbol b'yam b'mokom she'en b'nei adam roim osa. He says, for sure, that it's going to have to be in a very private place, mishum darkei tzibur, and the Shulchan Aruch writes, lo titbol b'makom sheyesh chashash sheyiruah b'nei adam. We're not going to allow tefillah in a place where maybe people will see us. You have to find a very private place. But he says, me'ikar adin ein lo litva. He says she should not go into the Yam. And he says that the hora that this Rav was paskening in favor of her going to the mikveh by day, tamua hora zu. That's a very strong language. It's a tema to say such a thing, that during Corona we're going to allow a woman to go into the Yam. He says that also litbol b'makom sheyesh b'karka iso tit mechashash chatzitza. He says that we have a halachic ruling, paskin in Shulchan Aruch, that a woman is not allowed to go into a body of water for mikvah for tefillah if it's got loose cement on the ground, because of a chashash chatzitza, that some of the cement will be on her legs or between her toes. And then Rav Weiss writes, this is the punchline of the tshuva, Yadua shebechofei hayam, at the seashore, shliach miod, it's very common, v'yesh chashash chomur. And then he goes on to say that for a woman to go into the ocean is ein l'cha sakana gdola mizu. Forget about laws of mikvah and tefillah. It's a sakana. How could we allow such a thing? And he ends the tshuva by writing on page Tov Chav Ches, B'chol tkufa zu lo shamanu v'lo yadanu af al mikra echad shel isha shenidbek al yidei tefillah b'mikvah. You're telling me that she doesn't want to go to the mikveh because of Corona, and therefore she can go to the Yam. There's a bigger danger in her going to the Yam than in going to the mikveh. And therefore he says, regarding this hora, that she should go to the Yam, Chalila lahoros can. Heaven forbid. Again, keep in mind that the big day Chamudas from Daniel Kleiman had no problem with going into the Yam. This wasn't an issue. Of course it's mutter. The only problem is that it was during the day. And if it's during the day, you have the Easter for a woman to go during the day, unless it's an ones hashavel chol nefesh, based on the Chamudei Daniel in the Piskei Corona. But going to the Yam, it's a great idea. Maybe do it at night. Rav says, Chalila, heaven forbid such a psak. But yesh lahakpid b'mikvos, we have to make sure that mikvos are makpid on kloli as zehirus nikayin v'haygenya. They have to be very high, super duper hygienic. And we should go ahead and sit down with the people in charge of the mikveh, the balanis and the achroim al nikayin mikvos, and tell them and warn them that chas v'shalom, if they fall a little bit below the standards of hygiene, they could bring about the death of people. V'yesh lahazmin kol isha b'fnei atzma lizar b'kol kloli hazehirus. There's no way, no how that you can allow a woman to go into the Yam. And we have to worry about chatzitza. And that's the end of the story. What could I say? I'm pushing in shock. And his brother is married to my wife's first cousin. It's just I can't deal with it. Let it go to the mikveh in the ocean. She'll wear sandals, and when she gets to the point where the water reaches, again, I'm just imagining, I'm pontificating from my mind, that when she gets to the point where the water reaches a little bit higher, she lifts up her feet from the sandals. She'll have to lose a pair of sandals. Today you can get sandals, you go to a hotel, they'll give it to you for free. She's got no contact. And not only that, probably the sand, when you go out a few feet into the water, is in certain, again, I don't know, Toronto, I'm not sure what goes on, but in many places, it's not like concrete, like tit, where it's soft and you get stuck with little pieces of concrete. It's a soft bed. I myself, on many occasions, went to the ocean, and again, when I got out of the ocean, then I was full of sand. They have these, if you go to the Dead Sea and all these places, they have these faucets, where you can clean off your feet. But inside the water, I don't get it. Sakana? Ein lecha sakana gedola mizu? I don't know. I'm wondering in my own mind. I speak to my mother-in-law, who's Baruch Hashem still alive and well, and she tells me stories about her youth and what women did in her youth. I'm not going back generations, Rabosa, to go to a mikveh when they didn't have access to a mikveh and they broke the ice. You know what I'm talking about, Rabosa? Have any clue? You know what I'm talking about. So why do you look at me like I'm crazy? And you're telling me you break the ice to be Tovil in a mikveh? You talk about a Chabad Shaliach who lands on the North Pole to do kiruv to the Eskimos. I don't know who. And there are no mikvahs until they build a mikvah 5 years later, 2 years later. The Chabad are experts at raising funds. Kol hakavod. The first year they get some funds from 770, and then they're on their own. And they do amazing work in fundraising. Some of the best fundraisers are not necessarily at the Simon Wiesenthal Center in LA. They're at Chabad in Mexico. I don't know where. And they build beautiful mikvahs. But until the mikvah is up and running, what is the Chabad? So maybe she takes a plane, and it's she takes a 10-hour flight, to get to the nearest mikvah. But maybe she breaks the ice in the ocean. I don't know what. Hayu dvar me'olam. But what I'm fascinated is, minakotza lakotza, about the issue of going to the mikveh during the day, which is against the Chamudei Daniel quote in the Piskei Tshuva. And it's almost explicit against the Gemara in Nida. So for that, Rav Weiss doesn't even see an issue. He doesn't blink. He just quotes the Rambam and let's go home. A chola decides that she can't go to mikvah, so she'll go during the day.
What again is the issue of going during the day?
The Rabbanan made Xera. This is what we discussed last week.
Yeah,
And that is that we're afraid of Srach Bita. Her daughter might think, as she grows up, that her mother goes to mikvah on the 7th day. She'll make a confusion between the 7th and the 8th day. So they made Xera that there's no tefillah during the 8th day. The Gemara tells us in the Masechta Nida that in certain cities, and the Gemara goes through the names of the Amoraim, Abai in his city and Rav in his city, each case for a different reason, they made a new takana that you're allowed to go to mikveh during the day because the city was under siege. Says the Chamudei Daniel that we're not going to be matter of, for the sake of an individual woman. If it's the whole city, then the young girls will understand that there was a takana allowing mikveh during the day on the 8th day, and that was a takana in the city. But for one woman, it's her mother goes to mikveh during the day. We have Srach Bita, she thinks it's the 7th day. And Rav Weiss has no problem with a woman going to mikveh by day because she's afraid to go to the local mikveh. I mean, you understand what I'm saying? I mean, when it comes to going into the ocean, the Big Day Chamudos, who's a ganze final Lamton, he has no problem with a woman going into the ocean. And Rav Weiss says it's chas v'sholom such a hurrah. Tmili. His language is chalila lahoros ken. Why? Because of the chatzitza problem with the sand and ein lecha sakona gedola mizu. I mean, all these issues can be avoided, can be circumvented. And the Pella is that in the Tshuva, he really doesn't quote any sources to prove this point. So I both say, a lot of this that I'm sharing with you is my own personal prejudice. I don't want anyone to think I have anything against Rav Weiss. He's a ganz feine Talmid Chacham. What he has at his fingertips, I'll never have in my lifetime. If I would live 100 lives, I wouldn't have what he has at his fingertips. But my prejudice here is that I believe from the bottom of my heart that Psak Halacha is not a discipline unto itself. It is one and the same as just good, healthy, bona fide Talmudic logic, dialectic analysis. And that's why I feel so much more at home with the Chamudei Daniel. I mean, the Bigdei Chamudos. I've never met the man. I don't even know what he looks like. If I saw him on the street, I'd probably nod my head because I assume he has a beard. I don't know. So, if you meet a Jew in Flatbush in Brooklyn and he has a beard, he's probably a rabbi. Even that's not so true anymore. So but I don't know the man from a hole in the wall. Rav Weiss I know, but Rav Daniel Kleinman is a name out of nowhere for me. I can't even get a hold of the Sefer, thanks to David who takes these photographs. Otherwise I wouldn't be able to quote him for beings. Now at least I can quote him from my smartphone. but his approach is
By the way,
very
with regards-
solid. You know, he goes back to the Gemara and he challenges you. Look at the Gemara. Read the Gemara. Yeah, what'd you say, Bob?
With regards to the tefillah, doesn't the Mishnah talk about that the tit, like when you go into a mikveh, like there's a case with the bed, where the legs of the bed go down into the tit, and that's not a chatzitza? Or am I getting it wrong?
Because her body is not inside the tit. Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
It's just the
and-
legs of the bed.
Right.
So I
I
don't know.
think-
In our oceans, I don't know. Do we have to operate with the premise that her legs are down in the sand in such a way that she's getting sand caught in
No, but in
her
other words,
feet?
if I'm toivel anything and in the mikveh, it's a kosher mikveh, and something is like, let's say whenever you go into a mikveh that's an actual mikveh, like a cave or whatever, and you if your legs get into sand, that's a chatzitza for sure.
Yeah, I think so, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
That's how I remember it. Again, I'm not learning mikvahs, but that was the impression I had.
Right.
Okay,
Okay,
Rabosai?
Mr. Koch.
Shkoyach, and also again, it should be I'd be as goal, as we say, for your wife's the Yavelus and the loss of her mother, and we should always share good news together.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
Thank you so much.
All good.